Okay. Well, everybody, welcome to this version of Your Town, Alabama's Lunch and Learns. We're going to be talking about outdoor recreation today with the University of Alabama's Center for Economic Development's Brian Rushing. That's a mouthful. Brian, thanks for joining us and doing this. Brian has worked with communities around Alabama implementing trails and outdoor recreation into their planning and programming, and utilizing outdoor recreation as a tool for economic development. It's really exciting to see that stuff coming up around the state. We, and as Brian is probably going to say this, have been identified as one of the best states in the country for outdoor recreation. And we are just blessed with a lot of natural resources here in Alabama. We've got an amazing and beautiful state. From the Your Town, Alabama front, if you haven't heard already, we are hosting our workshop this year. It'll be the first time in several years that we've been able to do this. It's at Camp McDowell, the last week of April. Registration is up and available on the Your Town, Alabama website. Again, those dates are April 27th through the 29th. So if you have not registered, go to yourtownalabama.com and register. I will put up a link in the chat. But as far as everything else goes, I won't waste any more of our time. Brian, take it away.
All right, Kalia, thank you very much. I'll go ahead and share my screen here. Can you see that okay? I'll, if I don't hear from you, I'll assume. Okay, great. Thank you. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for bearing with us. Name again is Brian Rushing. I'm with the University of Alabama Center for Economic Development. And we work throughout the state on a variety of economic development topics, but we focus quite a bit of our work on working with in rural areas and with economic development being an assets-based approach process. Oftentimes we find ourselves working in the realm of heritage-based tourism and outdoor recreation. So was very happy to get the invitation to come and speak with you all today. So, so the title of my presentation is Outdoor Recreation and Trails: Opportunities to Enhance Your Town. And if you'll forgive me a little bit, I'm going to sort of cross-reference or cross-pollinate, however you want to call it, outdoor recreation and trails. Trails are really important part of outdoor recreation, and a lot of what I'm speaking about really is applicable to either or and to both, essentially. So forgive me as I kind of flow back and forth in the terminology here just a little bit. Real quick, I'll go through an overview here of, and I apologize, I think somebody may not be on mute. If you could mute yourselves, that would certainly help me a little bit on my end. Thank you. In the recording. Quick overview of what we'll be talking about. Just want to level set with you on some definitions and benefits related to outdoor recreation. Talk a bit about some trends that are happening throughout really the United States, but I'll kind of focus regionally as well as within Alabama. And then want to just talk with you about maybe some ways that you could go about identifying some opportunities within your community. So some definitions. This slide is actually lifted from the Outdoor Industry Association. And when we talk, or at least the graphic is, when we talk about outdoor recreation, at least for the purposes of this conversation, we're basically talking about the activities you see within the orange area here: hunting, fishing, camping, motorized sports, both off-roading as well as motorcycling. The Outdoor Industry Association does categorize trail sports as a specific thing. So types of activities that actually are specific to trails. But there are also water sports, kayaking, rafting, and canoeing, as well as cycling, both on and off road, as well as wildlife viewing. But so for the purposes of outdoor recreation and talking about the outdoor recreation economy, these are the activities we're really kind of focused on. I left out snow sports there, at least for Alabama, since we don't have too many snow sports available here in our state. But it's important to note again that trails are an important part of. They facilitate these activities in large part, and they're often closely associated with these activities. So again, we're talking about outdoor recreation. We're also in large part kind of talking about trails. But what this really does not include are what we consider traditional, organized athletics. Benefits of outdoor recreation. We'll start with a bit of a discussion on that. And we typically talk about the economic benefits associated with outdoor recreation, and I will delve into that a little bit more along with health. I've got both of those highlighted, but I'll go ahead and just mention that with economic impacts or benefits from outdoor recreation, you're generally talking about a couple of different areas. One is related to kind of the direct spending associated with engaging in whatever the activity or activities are. And then you're also talking about, and so that's kind of a short term, if you will, or direct impact, but an important long-term impact is, in one that's really transformative, is this idea of competing in the quality of life marketplace. We'll talk about that in just a little bit. But you also have increasing property values. I'll also point out that there is an economic component to health. When it does come to health, if you've got a built environment that is conducive to active living, you end up having a healthier population. And I like to point out that's both physically as well as mentally. But you result in reduced healthcare costs when you have an environment that really supports active living. I will go ahead and mention community and quality of life and environment. Those are usually not the selling points when it comes to trying to convince your elected leadership. In some cases they are, but oftentimes they're a little bit further back on the back burner, if you will, of priorities. But certainly it goes without saying that when you have greater physical connections and common spaces within a community, you increase the social connections and you strengthen that community. And obviously the more activities you have available in a community, the people are happier and they've got more things to do. So kind of a bit of a no-brainer there. When it comes to the environment, obviously, you've got a lot of overlap between outdoor recreation and environmental protection and conservation. You can have recreational opportunities along trails and greenways. Those trails and greenways can also provide for alternative transportation options, which is becoming more and more important these days. Conservation land certainly can have outdoor recreation opportunities within them. And then obviously when you're enhancing or when you're cultivating personal connections with the outdoors, you support the development of a conservation ethic, or what Aldo Leopold used to call a land ethic. And so those are important things. But we will focus in on the economic benefit just for the sake of our conversation here, and kind of zooming in a little bit on direct spending. Whenever you have outdoor recreation and trail development in a community or in a region, you create opportunity for business. And that comes really kind of in two forms. One is through modified behaviors of your residents. So if you have a new trail that comes through, a resident or your neighboring population would be more inclined to use that trail. They need walking shoes, maybe a backpack, a bicycle, that sort of thing. And so they're going to go out and buy those things. So there's a bit of a behavior modification that oftentimes results in a bit of a retail effect. If you're talking about an outdoor recreation project or a trail project that has that's able to be marketed to a broader audience where you can actually attract tourists, then you're talking about the tourism dollars. And so when you get tourists coming in your community, they're spending money oftentimes on equipment rental, on fuel, on lodging, on dining. And then that's also an opportunity for those visitors to your community to go and see and do other things that your community has to offer. So your cultural events, your destinations, i.e. your museums, your other recreation sites, as well as, of course, just, patronizing all of the businesses that are available within your community. So that's just kind of direct spending, broadly speaking. A couple of examples of direct spending economic impact. These are primarily going to be, for the most part, tourism dollars, but there certainly is some local population effect here as well. But back in 2015, Jacksonville State University did an economic impact study on the Chief Ladiga Trail, which is Alabama's longest bike ped trail or rail trail at 32.5 miles. It becomes the Silver Comet Trail when it goes over into Georgia. But that trail, they estimate, generates about $1.5 million in annual economic impact. This particular project was done for about $2 million. It has been 20 to 25 years ago, so those are 20 to 25-year-old dollars we're talking about, and it was cheaper in general back then to do rail trail projects. But nevertheless, $2 million project, about $50,000 a year for the municipalities along that trail to operate it. But a $1.5 million annual economic impact, not too shabby there. Another great example is over in Columbus, Georgia, actually on the Chattahoochee River, right across the river from Phoenix. Columbus, a few years back, removed a couple of low-head dams over there, opened up the historic falls there along the fall line on the Chattahoochee, and engineered a pretty amazing whitewater park, which is billed as the world's largest urban whitewater park. That was a $23 million project, and I apologize if my toolbar on my screen might be obscuring this slide. I don't quite know how to get that to disappear, but nevertheless, that particular site generates $42 million in annual local economic impact. That's through direct spending. So another example of basically a project that pays for itself, about every 16 months. And I like to point out, and we see this time and time again with outdoor recreation projects that have whatever the money is that is invested in them oftentimes gets paid back very quickly and time again. So really great investments for communities to make. Talking about property values, basically in this day and age, outdoor recreation, and in particular greenways and trails, are sought after. You can see on this home buyer survey, which was actually done back in the early to mid 2000s, walking and jogging and bike trails were actually second only to highway access. This is a study that was done by the Home Builders Association and National Association of Realtors, and found that really, having those trails nearby was really an important amenity for home buyers. And in fact, in residential properties, if you have those properties backing up to or near developed greenways and publicly accessible spaces, they can command as much as a 20% premium on the fair market. And if you doubt this at all, just go on Zillow or Trulia. I think this was Zillow here. And I just did a search over in West Georgia for the Silver Comet Trail. And lo and behold, all of these listings popped up with some mention of proximity to the Silver Comet Trail. So if people didn't demand this stuff, it wouldn't be marketed as such. Talking about the quality of life marketplace, this is really where you're talking about transforming your community into a place where people want to live and where businesses want to relocate. And it is, essentially competing for talent and for jobs, and competing against other communities to do it. And those communities that have outdoor recreation as a significant part of their offering, quality of life offering, oftentimes win out. And a great case was bad for Alabama, but good for Tennessee. But Chattanooga beat out the short list of cities that included Huntsville for the Volkswagen plant, you may recall, in 2010. And that was a $1 billion investment, 2,000 jobs. The leadership of Volkswagen said that Chattanooga's emphasis on protecting natural amenities and creating a healthier city and improving quality of life was one of the main drivers for that decision. And I'll never forget Walt Maddox one time in a speech talked about, he's the mayor of Tuscaloosa, for those of you who may not know. He went on a recruiting trip to Austria to hopefully land a Mercedes supplier. I can't recall if it was a secondary or tertiary supplier, but these suppliers have to be within a certain radius, or excuse me, a certain distance from the plant. And so they could be in Tuscaloosa, or they could be in another town. They could have certainly been in Birmingham. But when they talked to Walt, to Mayor Maddox said that this executive said to him, "Don't tell me about your tax incentives. What I want to hear about is your symphony and your parks." And lo and behold, that supplier ended up settling in the city of Tuscaloosa. So real good example of how quality of life attracts corporate relocations oftentimes. Health benefits, really important. There's a series of studies that have shown that if you have a built environment that creates, that provides access for people to have engage in physical activity, it's safe and accessible to folks, that folks who are within relative close proximity to that infrastructure have almost a 50% chance, a 50% greater chance of engaging in regular and frequent physical activity. That regular activity has direct benefits, health benefits. It reduces obesity and obesity-related disease. And when that happens, you have reduced healthcare costs. And just a study that was done kind of in advance of the Red Rock Trail plan development or implementation, but was done along with the Red Rock planning process here in Jefferson County, found that basically through surveying residents of Jefferson County, asking them if they would use this infrastructure if it was built, in this case, it's a 750-mile trail system. Based upon those responses, the UAB found that there would be a direct medical expense savings of somewhere between $21 and $43 million. So we're talking about real improvement in quality of life, real improvement in health, real improvement in reducing healthcare expenses. So let's look at some trends going on right now with respect to outdoor recreation and with respect to trails in particular. Trails and outdoor recreation are really a booming business right now in many cities, in a lot of rural communities, in some states broadly, are investing significantly in developing their outdoor recreation economies. And a major feature of developing those economies are regional trail systems. One thing I really like to point out is the importance of outdoor recreation economies to the success of communities. And the Headwaters Economic Group, along with the USDA Economic Research Group, basically determined that since 2010, counties throughout the United States that had an outdoor recreation economy, and there's a specific threshold that qualifies a county to have an outdoor recreation economy. I won't go into that definition, but if you're interested, you can look it up, certainly with Headwaters Economics. But suffice to say, counties that have economies that are heavily reliant on outdoor recreation have consistently attracted more residents and generated greater economic opportunity or income opportunity than non-recreation counties. This applies to both urban, suburban, as well as rural counties. But the thing that I think is really interesting is with respect to rural counties, and as you all probably know, rural counties throughout the country, and not only in Alabama, but throughout the United States, continue to hemorrhage population, folks moving to major metropolitan areas from our rural counties. But those rural counties that did have recreation economies and natural amenities since 2010 actually grew slightly during that time, as opposed to the typical scenario, which was they lost these non-recreation counties lost about 20 people per 100 or per 1,000 residents. So hard to prove direct cause and effect, but there's a very close association there, which is really significant and important. Going to just highlight a few examples of investments that are being made in regional trail systems, mostly actually all in the Southeast here, kind of ranging from very large city down to small community. Atlanta Beltline, huge investment, huge effort to retrofit a 33-mile network of trails kind of in and around the city center that incorporates 1,300 acres of green space, new green space, and about 700 acres of redeveloped green space. A lot of components to this project. It's not just trails, but it's transit, parks, affordable housing, streetscape improvements, and neighborhood redevelopment. Between the private dollars that have been raised to actually build that infrastructure, as well as public funds that have been brought to the table, that totals about $600 million. But what really is significant is the fact that since the Beltline was announced and started being built, the market has spoken, and people want to live next to those amenities, and developers know that. And so during the time that the Beltline has been in the process of development, over $6 billion in private development investment has occurred within that corridor. So really, really significant. $600 million investment, $6.2 billion coming back from the private development community. Really significant. Of course, Chattanooga, kind of the poster child of downtown redevelopment, revitalization around parks and green space. They've got a 100-mile Greenway master plan. They're still in the process of completely building out. But parks and trails are a major component of their organized and concerted revitalization effort, which has been spearheaded by a private foundation, along with a nonprofit development corporation that came together to work with local government and to provide incentives for redevelopment and to retrofit this green space into Chattanooga, which, by the way, in the 1970s had some of the worst air pollution in the country and was not a place that many people really cared to visit very often. $200 million in public-private funds invested in the park and green space infrastructure thus far since 1992. And over that period of time, $5 billion in private downtown investment in the city of Chattanooga. So really significant numbers there. Working our way down a little bit as far as size of cities go, Greenville, South Carolina, incredible work they've been doing there through their nonprofit development corporation. 52-mile Swamp Rabbit Trail is a network that they're in the process of developing. They've built 22 miles of it. I've had people from Greenville tell me that in 2000, there was no reason to be in downtown Greenville on a Saturday morning. And by 2010, Greenville had turned around, and you couldn't beat the people away with a stick off of Main Street. It really is a dynamic city, and beautiful, beautiful work that they've done there. And another great example of building green space and seeing the businesses flock. In Huntsville, Huntsville is arguably kind of at the vanguard of greenways development in Alabama. They have a 312-mile plan for a connected network of multi-use hiking and paddling trails. Thus far, they've built 73 miles. A lot of close collaborative work between the Land Trust for North Alabama and the city of Huntsville government, as well as Madison County. And that is now branched out into a regional trail plan called the Singing River Trail, which Dr. John Kovach is in the process of moving forward. And that's ultimately going to be a regional spine trail that will connect basically the Shoals all the way up to Bridgeport across the entire breadth of North Alabama. In Jefferson County, I mentioned earlier the Red Rock Trail System 750-mile network on and off street bike ped trails. 125 miles have been built thus far. And then getting down to a smaller community, looking at Limestone County, specifically Athens, Oakmont areas. They have done a wonderful job of developing a system or a network of trails, not necessarily a whole lot of infrastructure, But there is the 12-mile long Richard Martin Rail Trail, which was the very first rail trail in Alabama they put in place back in the 90s. They've also basically designated areas of backcountry road that is really scenic as the Noah Bike Trail, and then the Elk River runs right through it. And they've got developed access points along the Elk River that are marketed as the Elk River Paddling Trail or Elk River Blueway. And so Limestone County now has a bit of an identity as an outdoor recreation destination. In the little town of Elkmont, top right-hand or top left-hand corner is a photo of downtown Elkmont where the Richard Martin Trail comes through. And, 30 years ago, the only thing there was maybe the Red Devil Cafe, but now there's Belshever Cheese and a couple of outfitters, and every single little storefront there in Elkmont is actually occupied. So it works for big towns, it works for small towns as well. Just a quick mention of some hot outdoor recreation trends, which are, again, trail associated or trail oriented, but equestrian camping is really big. And if you can get the horseback riders to come to your community and to spend the night, they will spend money. And a great example of this is Rockbridge Canyon Equestrian Park up in Marion County, Alabama. Hodges is the town, and they've done a wonderful job of developing that park with about 30 miles of equestrian trails. Last I checked, about 3 years ago before the pandemic, they were getting about 10,000 visitors in a town of 200 each year. So pretty big. And again, they bring along quite a bit of cash when they visit your community. ATV and OHV parks, the few parks we have in Alabama are being loved to death, shall we say. And so there's a lot of need for additional development of ATV and OHV parks in a similar fashion to the equestrian folks. A lot of folks will trailer up and take their ATVs on cross-country trips and go hit these sites. So any opportunity that we've got to develop ATV and OHV parks would be a really good thing in Alabama. Paddling trails, taking your waterways and turning them into officially designated paddling trails is a really hot trend. And photo in the bottom left-hand corner is of the Cahaba Blueway and the demonstration project we did for best practices on designing and building water accesses there. Rail trails, we are a bit behind the curve with respect to rail trail development in Alabama. The Chief Ladaga is our longest at 32.5 miles. Richard Martin's at about 12 miles or so. All the other ones below that are shorter trails. So need to get more rail trails in Alabama, and rail trails, long distance rail trails are huge cycling tourist draws. Again, people will pack their bikes up and travel across country to visit communities that have these trails. It's a wonderful tourism opportunity. And then glamping, anytime that you can dovetail in your decked out wall tents that provide nice amenities into any of your recreation areas, glamping is a hot thing right now with a very modest investment. Now on to identifying some opportunities, just to kind of give you a little bit of a primer on ways that you can begin to think about projects in your community. And in most cases, it behooves communities to engage a professional landscape architect, work with your regional planning group, et cetera, to help guide you through a planning process. But it is possible, certainly, for you to kind of go through the exercise, at least initially on your own, and begin to get some thoughts together. So this is a little bit of a primer on kind of what to think about. But in order to identify opportunities and projects that are, in all likelihood feasible, you got to look at really four core things: goals, assets, operational needs, and funding. And essentially looking at those things will help you divine where the opportunities are and where you might want to focus your attentions. This is not a linear process per se. In fact, as you kind of go through this process, you end up oftentimes going back and refining something that you have done before. But For the sake of organization, I have put everything up here in bullet points. But with goals, obviously starting out with a set of goals is a wonderful starting point. Ideally, goals related to outdoor recreation and/or trails, you should kind of fold that into or have that be in some form or fashion founded upon your community strategic plan and/or comprehensive plan. So these are things that you kind of need to be thinking about when you're doing that planning, hopefully, so that everything that you build and create is ultimately supportive of whatever your community is trying to do. But essentially, determining your goals is asking yourselves the question what it is that you want to do, and it can be any number of things. It could be just focusing on enhancing quality of life or serving an underserved population, or creating a tourism destination, or it could be all three of those. And it can be many other things as well. But in all cases, the leadership in a community can certainly ask itself these broad questions about what it is we're trying to do here. But in all cases, it's critically important to engage the public and find out from the public what it wants and what it needs. They may not necessarily be aware of quality of life or that there's an underserved population that needs to be served. That's kind of the job of the leadership, the elected leadership, to be thinking about those things, and for the planners to be thinking about those things. But they may have specific needs and wants that they would like to see met. And so going to them and finding out what it is that they would like to see is critically important too. And that feeds back into oftentimes the decisions that go into determining what your goals are going to be. Next, again, not exactly in a linear fashion, but just the next item for consideration kind of in this process are what are your assets? And there are a number of assets. It's not just limited to what your destinations are or what your anchor sites are, but it does include anchor sites. And by anchor sites, we mean, where are the places where people currently like to go? Where are places where people might like to go if they had better access? So there could be existing recreation sites. There could be other destinations of some local or regional import. Your natural endowments. Do you have a river? Do you have a scenic view? Do you have mountains? Do you have wetland areas? Do you have a great place potentially where people could go and look at wildlife or view birds? Those are kind of your natural endowments that are not yet developed, but are places that if acquired, protected, and developed sustainably for public access, could sort of be added to your list of anchor sites. What are your corridors? These are public rights of way. They could be rail corridors. They could be utility rights of way. They could be, public roads or other types of linear sort of arrangements that potentially could create accesses. A green belt along a river or stream, et cetera. So what are your corridors out there? Who are your hospitality providers? Your existing dining and lodging providers are an asset. And so you need to kind of account for who those are and what they provide. In addition to hospitality, I might also add your other businesses that might lend themselves to outdoor recreation. So if you have existing businesses, want to know about them, because obviously you'll be serving them. But if you're looking at local businesses and hospitality providers and you kind of realize, oh, there's a gap there, then that's something you can be mindful of as you're thinking about this project and even potentially developing more outdoor recreation opportunities and maybe developing your local outdoor recreation economy. Your organizational capacity, that is an asset. So if you have capacity to take on new projects or have capacity to maintain new infrastructure, that sort of thing, if there's particular expertise that you can bring to the table, that is a huge asset. But I've got partners highlighted here because it is a critically important consideration that unfortunately I think a lot of communities don't think about enough. And partners can come in a variety of forms. They can be local businesses, they can be foundations, They can be a volunteer corps or a friends group. Partners can provide in-kind services, they can provide materials, they can provide funding. So it's important to think about what are your potential partners and what are your existing partners within your community, and make sure you've got those accounted for, and make sure that those partners and potential partners that you're engaging them early on in the process, so that they become a key stakeholder in helping you to achieve your goals in your outdoor recreation development. Excuse me. Operational needs are critically important. It's not enough to be just thinking about developing infrastructure. It is arguably a much more important consideration how you're going to take care of it. You've got to monitor, maintain, and police it. And so your operational needs are critically important. And so if your city or town does not have organizational capacity to take on that additional stewardship responsibility, then that's where you've got to look to partners and to help increase that capacity, whether it be through funding, whether it be through in-kind help. Again, friends groups are oftentimes a really great way of helping to supplement the stewardship of sites. So oftentimes, say for instance, if you have a limitation within your operational needs and you have a limitation with respect to partners in organizational capacity, if your operational needs exceed capacity or potential capacity, excuse me, you may have to go back and adjust your goals that you're looking at with respect to a particular project. With respect to funding, and again, if you cannot see the very bottom bullet point, I apologize. The two bullets are federal dollars and private match, but your funding, obviously critically important. There are a number of federal funding programs that are administered primarily through state agencies, not always, but primarily. Those more often than not have a private match requirement that you're going to have to come up with at the local level. So again, whether it's your money, whether it's partner money, ideally you've got a partnership that's coming together that's pooling its resources. That's oftentimes much more attractive to funders, to federal funders. And so, but you got to think about where that match is coming from. With most federal programs too, it's a reimbursement proposition. So you're gonna have to front the cost and then apply for reimbursement after the grant is awarded. So those are just things that are important to think about. So again, if you can only have access to a certain amount of funding, that might necessitate going back and adjusting, what goals you may have with your specific project. So just some things to think about, and would encourage you again to, if you're thinking about a project, kind of go through these considerations, kind of run the numbers, if you will, run the thought process both ways, back and forth, and see what you come up with. You might get something that actually is feasible. Then I would recommend going and talking to some professional planners. Federal funding through state agencies. This is just a real quick list. Primarily ADECA and ALDOT. USDA Rural Development, excuse me, is not a state agency. That's should not be categorized on this page. I apologize. But Rural Development is USDA federal agency. But ADECA and ALDOT by far are the primary administrators for programs, funding programs that can build trails and outdoor recreation. Recreational Trails Program through ADECA focused on strictly recreational trails, whereas ALDOT's Transportation Alternatives Program is focused on those alternative connecting trails. So if it's a linear trail connecting two places, that's great for transportation alternatives. A linear trail can be Recreational Trails Program as well, but Recreational Trails Program can fund the loop trails, whereas TAP, Transportation Alternatives, cannot. The Land and Water Conservation Fund is also administered by ADECA. A little bit tougher match to come up with. It's a 50-50 match, where 50% federal funds, 50% local match, whereas RTP is 80 federal and 20 local. So just a consideration. ADECA also makes available community development block grants, which oftentimes can provide significant funding for planning as well as development. You can also get funding primarily for development, but also sometimes for planning as well through the Appalachian Regional Commission and the Delton Regional Authority if you're within those regions. And obviously CDBG, Community Development Block Grant, is really only for qualifying communities. I mentioned ALDOT, USDA Rural Development. There are a plethora of Farm Bill programs out there, but the two that really can be applied to outdoor recreation or community facilities program, which can be a loan or a grant, and then the Rural Community Development Initiatives grant. Just a real quick mention of the 2021 update of the statewide comprehensive outdoor recreation plan. Our office conducted this planning process on behalf of ADECA and submitted it last September. We understand that it is currently under review. And I think they're reviewing it with the National Park Service right now, but this is the document, a document that is going to be extremely helpful as you plan projects that help fill needs in your community and in your region. So once it comes out, and we hope it will in the relatively near future, this is going to be an important document to consult, and is actually the document that decisions for funding under the Land and Water Conservation Fund are made. And just one final note about three things: programming, public information, and marketing and promotions. In many, many cases, in fact, maybe even in most cases, it's not enough to just build the infrastructure. It's really important if you want to get the biggest bang for your buck with respect to quality of life, and certainly with respect to tourism, if you've got an amenity that can be a tourism draw, that you have programming to engage the public. Programming is important, certainly for reaching communities that are underserved or might not necessarily engage in the activity that you've built a facility to accommodate. There also are people out there who are not, just not inclined necessarily to engage in outdoor recreation. So the program really helps with that. 100 Alabama Miles Challenge is a program that we have available. It's just out there online at 100alabamamiles.org. And it's kind of a fun way to get people engaged in the outdoors. Feel free to take advantage of it, totally free. But in particular, programming where you've got person to person, shall we say, or group activities is really important. The public information is key, both online as well as in print and on signage. Helping people to understand where they are, what's available on a given site is critically important. And then again, if you're talking about a tourism opportunity, your marketing and promotions, in particular online, in the plethora of ways that you can market online, is critically important for providing opportunities for people who are online looking for things to do to find out about you and come and visit. So putting together a bit of a marketing plan around that and developing in particular those online tools is a really an important thing. And I think that's my last slide. So with that, I'll say thank you.
All right. Thank you, Brian, for that. That was great. If you have any questions, feel free to either put them in the chat, or we also have the Q&A feature. And we'll be happy to answer them from there. All right. Well, since we don't have any questions, Brian, thanks again. Somebody asked if we could share the slide deck. Yes, we have an email list. So Brian, if you want to send that to me, I can share that out with everybody.
Sure, be happy to do that.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, thank you everybody for attending. Sorry again for the technical difficulty we had. So I appreciate your patience there. Brian, thanks for joining us today, and we will look forward to seeing everybody at the next Your Town Lunch and Learn in March. We will get information about that out as soon as we've got it together. And again, if you haven't already done so, please register for the workshop, or at least consider attending the workshop for Your Town, Alabama this April. I put a link for the registration in the chat. So once again, thanks everybody, and we'll see you next time.